Hey again, this lecture we're going to begin looking at the actual process of doing cross-cultural conflict resolution. Um, Again, we've done a great job looking over all the stuff about Western conflict and Western conflict resolution. Those things are very valuable. They will be included on your exam, so be sure that you take good note of that. But now we're going to turn around and talk a little bit more about actual cross-cultural conflicts. And of course, I cannot possibly teach something that's going to tell you everything about every type of cross cultural conflict. We discussed this earlier in the class, but there are so many hundreds and hundreds of different cultures that each one of them carry with them their own tendencies, their own preferences, their own things. And so some of these are just going to be guidelines that will help you to understand how to do it. And we're going to talk about two specific ways in the next lecture of actually dealing with conflict in a less Western way of thinking. So, talking a little bit about learning to resolve cross-cultural conflicts, and just a few principles here. First, the fundamental cause of cross-cultural conflict is usually egocentrism and ethnocentrism. Okay, now I want to make this clear. Egocentrism and ethnocentrism is not only a Western issue. Everyone is ethnocentric. Every culture is ethnocentric. They all, and that's the next thing, all of us believe that our perspective, our worldview is the correct worldview, and our ways of doing things are the correct way of doing things, and they're better than other people's ways of doing things. I've dealt with people in all different types of cultures, and I've dealt with Russians, I've dealt with Latvians. Those are the two people group I've dealt with the most. But I've dealt with people of some other cultures as well, and each of them have the same issue with being ethnocentric. We all believe that we have a better way of doing things than other cultures. So please understand, this is not just attacking Westerners. Now, I will say, and this again, Dwayne Elmer talks about this in the textbook for the class, and this is also from Dwayne Elmer, but we as Westerners do have a tendency to suffer from a superiority complex because we feel that it is our culture, our education, and our knowledge makes us experts. Whatever situation we walk into, whatever cultural dynamic we're working with, we tend to assume that we are the ones who have the expertise, partially because we are very good at organizing information. We have PowerPoints. We have the other lectures before this. We have charts. We are able to interpret the charts, and we study things in a very meticulous way. And because of that, because we're good at organizing this information and pulling ideas out of the midst of data, we're really good at that. Therefore, we tend to look at ourselves as experts, which I think is the one thing that makes our ethnocentrism perhaps a little bit more grating. So that even though everyone has it, Westerners do have, especially Americans, do have a special version of ethnocentrism that probably really gets on people's nerves. So we really need to be sure to be willing to learn another person's cultural frame of reference to avoid conflict and also to learn how to resolve conflicts. There are a few challenges that we bring to the table of cross-cultural conflict that are somewhat unique to the Western worldview. First, we have the challenge of individualism. And basically, wherever individualism reigns supreme, community is easily sacrificed for personal preferences. As individualists, and I grew up as a rugged individualist, I was willing to take the heat for not fitting in. I was willing to stand up and stand against the crowd. I was willing to fight for what I felt was right, no matter what the cost was, even to relationship. And that is something that is ingrained within us. And as I said, we've talked about this before in the other section, it's not always wrong. We need to have some things we're willing to stand for. Okay, so I'm not saying we give that up. But it is a unique issue that causes us to have situations, and the second point, As long as there are other options available, we do not have to worry about or work at preserving our present relationships. And this can be seen in that says we can afford to take the unity of believers lightly if we have other options, and changes are relatively painless. Man, there's so many things that we read in the scriptures that were not written. It was not written to individualists. It was written to people who had a collectivist worldview. Individualism is really a modern thing. It's really a modern construct. And so when Paul, for instance, was writing to the church of Corinth, he was not writing to one of the 74 churches in Corinth. He was writing to the church at Corinth. And if you were a follower of Christ, you belonged to the body of believers, or the ecclesia of Corinth. And if you wanted to stay in relationship with the church in Corinth, there were certain ways of behavior and actions and things that you could do and things you couldn't do. And because of that, you had to resolve conflict. You had to figure out a way of resolving conflict and moving on with life and moving on together. But man, we've got, literally from the office I'm sitting in right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I just went out less than a mile. I went out my map in my head, less than a mile. There are 8 different churches within a mile of this building that are all part of the church. Their churches in the little town of Waxahachie. And I attend a church here that's within a mile of the school. And if things go horribly wrong at that church, in my opinion, I could hop up and say, well, I'm not going to go to this church anymore. I'm not going to go to First Assembly. I'm going to go to Second Assembly. I'm not going to First Baptist. I'm going to Second Avenue Baptist. And so individualists have a different view of conflict resolution, because we always say, well, if things get too bad, I'll just move on. If things get too bad, I just won't stay in relationship with these people. Most of the rest of the world doesn't have that. They don't have that mindset. They see themselves as part of a collective, and maintaining their relationship with that collective is high, high value. And because of individualism, church splits, the dissolution of friendships, breaking up of friends and business relationships, all those things are common. We move in and out of relationships. We move in and out of churches. We move in and out of business relationships. We shift, and there are people that I had a relationship with 20 years ago that if it weren't for Facebook, I wouldn't even know if they were still alive, because we were once in a relationship and we changed. Maybe we had a disagreement, or maybe it was just a shift in what we did for a living, or a shift in our worldview a little bit, and we've gone our own way. And I don't feel any weight of that. But if I were a collectivist, there would be weight to that. And so we need to understand that our individualism brings to the table some very different ideas about conflict and resolution. A second issue is the challenge of directness. I think we referred to this a little bit in our earlier lectures, but Westerners prefer clear, straight, and direct communication. We do not like it when someone speaks to us in obscure or circuitous ways. We don't like the idea of beating around the bush. We don't like, if you have something to say, just say it. And when someone is not straightforward with us, we tend to become suspicious. And sometimes we attach meaning to that. We impute that person with some negative intention or motivation. We think of them as being devious or deceptive or evasive. If a person is trying to not just come out and say, I can use the example of, the spam calls we all get now. You get a call and you answer it, and hey, Jerry, how's it going today? Okay. Well, I just want to talk a little. How are things going with your home? Okay. So I just want to check. Okay. Already we're getting suspicious, because, okay, what is it you really want? I know what you really want to do is get my information or sell me something. Just come out and say that. We don't like it when people are being indirect. And because of that, we tend to attach negative connotation to that. And the English language, our English language relies heavily on active voice. We like to use active voice. We provide precision. We point to a particular person or thing. Um, when something bad happens, we want to be able to say, that person purposefully did this or that, or that person failed to do this or that. They were the cause for this negative thing to happen. We like that precise, active voice that we can say, this person deserves blame, this person deserves reward or honor. But in many cultures, assigning blame or directly addressing an issue and conflict will cause people to lose face, be shamed, and feel as though they can no longer remain involved, either in a ministry or a company or a group. So we have this tendency to prefer directness, while the majority world tends to prefer indirectness. Most people in the world do not place high value on a direct face-to-face confrontation to resolve conflict. That is not, they don't consider that good. Matter of fact, directness is considered crude, harsh, uncultured, and often disrespectful. So that's sometimes people look at us and say, well, you're very uncultured. You don't have the ability to, in a respectful way, address in an indirect way an issue and come to a resolution. You're harsh, you're crude. They prefer to approach conflict indirectly or circuitously, using language that's not direct or pointed. They often use what's called passive voice or static voice, that suggests that someone was acted upon or something was acted upon, and that there was not any particular active participant. Okay? There was no active participant. The thing happened. That thing happened. Man, that drives Americans crazy. Stuff happened. No, you did things that made things happen. That's how we want to address it. But that's not how the majority world addresses it. And okay, in my country, in my culture, it is still okay for me in my country, in my culture, to deal with things the way we deal with them because we like the directness. When I leave my culture and my country, I no longer am allowed to enforce that. That's not how they do it, and it's my job to adjust. Static voice specifically describes what is or what was without any indication of who was responsible. I had a friend of mine who was serving in Belarus, and he told this story of one day he came up upon some traffic, and having traffic in a city in Russia or Belarus is very normal. But the interesting thing there is that when the traffic stops, and if a traffic stops, you're going to be there maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. I mean, it's just not just, I wonder when this is going to clear up. No, traffic stop. They literally get out of their cars, lean up against their car, smoke a cigarette, if there's anybody around, they might talk to somebody around them a little bit, but that's also not a big thing that they do. But my friend was sitting there in traffic and everybody stopped and got out. So he stopped and got out of his car because that's what everybody does. And he kind of looked around and he was able to walk up a little ways without being too obvious and look and see that there's a guy with a bicycle laying in the middle of the road. The bicycle's laying there and they were kind of working around him and doing all, so there was a couple of ambulances there and all this kind of stuff. And so he walked up to one of the men that were standing there nearby, and he said to the man, "Što slučilo? What happened?" And the man looked at him and said, "On umir." Okay, in Russian that means he died. Da. No. Što slučilo? What happened? He's wanting to know. He's an American. What happened? Did he ride along and have a heart attack and fall over and die? Was he hit by a car? Was he attacked by a dog? Did a space alien land? What happened? And the man just looked at him and said, "On umir." He died. And that's all the answer he was going to get. Because for them, they used the static voice. What happened? He died. Americans want the direct story, the whole story. Well, he was riding along and he went off the curb and this guy got nothing. And he came flying down the road. We want to have the whole story, but that's not the majority world preference. So static voices, that happened. Passive voice protects people from losing face. Now, if there's a Spanish speakers here, they may want to correct me on this, but I was told this by someone else. But me olvide in Spanish is not I forgot, it's it forgot itself to me. And actually, that the Latvian has that indirect also. Man notiek, to me happened. Man salst, I am, to me is thirst. Okay, so this indirect passive voice is a part of a lot of languages. That's not I am this or I did this. It is this happened to me. And so that indirect voice is literally a part of the linguistic systems in many cases. And the problem is that Westerns often misinterpret indirect methods, and I've already talked about this, so we'll just run through this real quickly. We sometimes see it as a lack of courage to confront. If they weren't so cowardly, they'd just deal with this. An unwillingness to deal with the issue, a lack of commitment to solve the problem, or for refusal to take responsibility for one's actions. That's the big thing. We often see this as people refusing to take responsibility for their actions. The author told the story about having a person who served in their home, and they heard a cup fall and it broke, and he walked in and he was asking her, well, what happened? And the answer was, and once again in the language she was speaking, it made perfect sense. The cup fell and it died. Oh yes, but did you hit it with your elbow? Were you carrying it? Were you washing it? And she looked and she said, the cup fell and it died. She is not really everyone in the room knows there's an unwritten knowledge that people know what actually happened. I dropped the cup. But the cultural dynamic is such that you do not force the person to state that out loud, because by stating that out loud, they lose face. They lose respect. And so therefore, these indirect methods, these indirect vocalizations are so much a part of their culture. And the reason it's part of the culture is that we have to accept that the central values of many majority world cultures is on saving face and not causing others to feel shame. That's huge. This is not just little things. This is a huge factor within their cultures. Saving face, protecting your own ability to be respectable and respected, and also not causing others to feel shame. These cultural values preserve smooth interpersonal relationship. They maintain harmony. They value minimizing potential conflict and restoring the community solidarity. That's what these cultures value. They don't value figuring out who did it and who's at fault and finding out the details. They value how can we keep. They value this preserving of smooth relationships, the maintaining of. They value these things, and since they value them, in a shame culture, the worst thing a person can do is cause another person to feel shamed or dishonored. One other illustration, and this is something that I noted, it was so weird because it took me years in Latvia. We lived in Latvia for 15 years, and we've made about 8 or 10 trips now back to Latvia. And it was on one of my first trips back to Latvia. I'd been out of the country for about 2 years. I went back and took about a 3-week ministry trip there. While we were there, we were staying at a hotel that had breakfast. And one of the waitresses was carrying a big old platter that has glasses on it. And she stumbled or something, and she fell forward, and the glasses fell on the floor. No one looked up. No one looked toward her. No one responded. And in that moment, I realized, oh my gosh, I didn't respond either. Because while I'm in Latvia, I drop into my Latvia mode of thinking. And I know that if I look up and look to see what happened, that will embarrass her. That will cause her to lose face. No one got up to help. She will come back and she will clean up the mess. And we will go about eating our meal. We will go about it, because to look at her or to help her or to try to figure out what happened and would cause her to lose face. And it's such a weird thing that even I've got my American brain and my Latvian brain, And while I'm in Latvia, I adapt to my Latvian brain. And even my Latvian brain knew that I wasn't supposed to look up, because causing shame would have been worse than anything else that happened to her that day. So we have to be aware of the fact that we have some challenges when it comes to dealing with cross cultural conflict. And these are challenges that we have to work on, uh, to surrender some of these things that we tend to value, and to take on what they value instead. And so, in the next lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about some of these specifics of ways that you can go about handling conflict and resolving conflict in ways that fit better within their value systems.